and that is for communication purposes. I am going to turn off my video just to help my connection and start with a brief introduction to today's webinar, People, Change, and Workplace Culture. This is part of the Leading Through Crisis webinar series that's been put on by Innoweave over the last few months. And let's get started. To begin with, I would like to acknowledge that the head office of the Mcconnell Foundation, where I work, is located on the traditional and unceded territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka Mohawk. The Kanien'kehá:ka are the guardians of the land and the water on which Montreal or Tiohtià:ke is situated, and this has long served as a site of exchange and meeting amongst various nations. The Mcconnell Foundation and myself are on a continuous learning journey towards reconciliation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. So it is very important that we recognize at the very minimum the traditional territories on which we work and play and live. And I see this recognition as a way not only to honor the history of this land, but also as a way to recognize that when we're speaking about social innovation practices and when we gather communities of learning and knowledge sharing, we are discussing tools that we believe are fundamental to our work towards reconciliation, but also exploring these tools will acknowledge that these often reflect and borrow from Indigenous traditions and Indigenous ways of knowing. So it is important to recognize this history as we continue to learn about it and as we continue to do our work. I would also like to acknowledge that we continue to all face very challenging times through this pandemic. So I hope that in this context of uncertainty, you are managing to stay as well as possible and to take care of your communities, of yourself and of your families. To give a little bit of background about the Mcconnell Foundation, just in case you're not familiar with our work, we are a private family foundation located in Montreal, and we work to advance a more inclusive, sustainable, resilient, and innovative country with a strong focus on social innovation and social finance. We take a systems change lens to our work. In our 83-year-old history, we've engaged with nonprofits and with the social sector across Canada, and this led us to develop different partnerships and relationships with social innovation practitioners, and that sparked an interest to develop that practice further and share this knowledge and learn. So that led to Innoweave. Innoweave is a program of the Mcconnell Foundation which helps nonprofits and collaboratives to grow their impact by supporting their capacity to innovate and to apply social innovation tools in their work. We do so by developing coaching streams with coaches and aim to make social innovation tools accessible, useful, and applicable. It is in the context of this program and that earlier in this year in April, Innoweave released Leading Through Crisis, which is a new stream that is focused on supporting nonprofits through the pandemic. As part of this stream, we offered a series of webinars, including this one today, as well as micro-coaching, mentoring, resources, and other supports. All of that information can be accessed on our website, and we will be sharing that in the chat and in a follow-up note. So today, the last webinar in the session, People, Change, and Workplace Culture, we will focus on giving some space to reflect on what are the human implications of all of the organizational adaptations that we've been having to adopt over the last 6 months, speak about what emerging capacities and needs you've been able to identify in your teams and in your staff, and explore some approaches to supporting healthier teams, to promoting staff engagement, and to empower team leadership. And this is with the overarching goal of supporting teams in the social sector through organizational changes as we continue to face the crisis, but also think of the rebuilding stage. The intended audience of today's session is any organization that is undergoing adaptations, and that might look like pressure on staffing capacity, transitions through different work settings from remote to hybrid, back to the office and remote again, I know we're living in this uncertainty, right? So we're adapting every day. It might also look like significant changes to programming that you're offering, changes to your teams, and other. Just as way of a disclaimer, this session will not cover content specific to addressing significant concerns to staff mental health or physical health. However, we have included at the end of the deck some resources that you can access if you're interested in doing some research in that space. You'll see to the bottom right of the deck a little book icon. You'll find that through the webinar slides, and Matt will speak to different resources throughout the content that he will be sharing, and you'll be able to refer to all of those resources at the end. So without further ado, or actually before I pass it over to Matt, we would like to get started with a Zoom poll, a quick Zoom poll that you'll see appearing on your screen. Jake will help me set that up, and we want to know a bit about how your team and workplace culture have been impacted since the start of the pandemic. We'll be referring to this later in the webinar. So Jake, if you could put that on the screen, and I'll give you a few seconds to answer the poll. And
just to confirm, folks can choose more than one answer, correct?
Yes. So please tick any boxes. I'm having some trouble looking at the poll results. So maybe Matt, if you could share what you're seeing.
Yeah, so we've had about 65% of people have voted. And I mean, it's really interesting. Ana Sofia, you wish you could see the results. But it's really interesting, a couple things here that I was not anticipating. So it'll be really interesting to take a look at. But we're now at about 82%. So a few more folks, and perhaps we could give it maybe another 10 seconds or so.
Super. Thank you, Matt. And so maybe Jake, you could help us share the poll results on the screen so that everyone can see those. And then without further ado, I will pass it on to Matt Youens, who will be leading us through some very, very interesting content today. Matt founded Human Elements, and this is an organization that supports nonprofits in strategic planning, capacity building, and specializes in workplace support, workplace culture support. And you'll see in the content that Matt will present that he's very passionate about putting the humans at the center of the organizations, at the center of his work. So without speaking anymore, Matt, take it away.
Perfect. Thank you for that introduction, Ana Sofia. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the very difficult thing within Zoom, which is to shift and share my screen without causing major issues. So let's see, let's cross my fingers and see if we can do this. And hopefully everyone should be seeing the roadmap for our session. Excellent. Yes, again, Ana Sofia, thank you very much for that introductions, and greetings and health to everybody here from Treaty 7, the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Tsuut'ina, the Stoney Nakoda Nations, and the Métis Nation Region 3. Again, Ana Sofia and Innoweave, thank you for inviting me here today to share a few tricks and tools I've learned over the years. I've had a few ticks as well develop that might help organizations settle down to this new normal that we find ourselves in, or as I refer to it, this Vuca world that we live, play, and work together in. So over the next 40 minutes or so, we'll be touching on a few key areas today, certainly whole webinars. can be spent on each of these topics. So we're going to be having a few light touches and a few deeper dives into a few of these topics. And we'll be providing greater context for some of these topics with tools outside of the session. So don't worry about being hungry for more on the subject. That's exactly what we were hoping to get out of you, the participants today. And what I'm going to be sharing today is certainly not rocket science, but from my perspective, this information is practical, it's useful, it can be leveraged within organizations of any size. And so taking a look at some of the poll results, some of the things that actually stood out to me as being quite interesting is that we had one person say that perceived decrease in team stress, whereas the opposite of that, perceived increase in team stress, was the #1 choice at 67% of the participants. Some of the other highlights that I see is that there has been a perceived negative impact on team culture. And also we see an increased team communication at 39% versus decreased team communication at 27%. So some really interesting results. From a staff engagement perspective, I'm looking at, there's a reduced staff engagement of 39 versus an increased staff engagement of 19%. So some interesting things for us to look at and reflect on. So let's sort of move along here. The first area that I wanted to explore today is actually the workplace culture itself. So let's actually get on with it. So, it goes without saying that COVID-19 pandemic has dramatically changed how we live, work, and play. So while there are many areas that can be called, foundational, here are 4 key ones that I wanted to talk about today. So #1 is psychological safety, and some of you are probably very familiar with this term, but this is really a shared belief that the team is a safe space for interpersonal risk-taking. So this means that every time you were in a group setting and you thought about asking a question, but you didn't, you probably had a low belief that it was a safe space to ask that question. So this is an important piece to get right with your team and your organization, but it takes time. And to garble the famous educator and author Stephen Covey, psychological safety moves at the speed of trust. The other piece that I want to talk about is norms. So again, a lot of you are probably familiar with norms, but these are really the expectations and rules through which a team interacts. Norms should be agreed upon, they should be clear, and they should be effective in achieving the team goals and setting up expectations of one another. But these are the 2 key pieces that I wanted to talk about today, rituals and change. So rituals or traditions, they make cultural values within the organization concrete and observable. So rituals can help solidify the workplace identity, insert life and energy into the workplace, give employees a chance to be agile, creative, and funny, create a shared sense of history, promote team bonding, give employees something to look forward to, and give something that employees can collectively remember. So if you want, in the chat box, perhaps share a ritual that their team has started since the pandemic. And what impacts have you seen from these rituals? So, some rituals are probably common, like birthday cards or pre-COVID birthday cakes. And perhaps some are not so common, like a weekly happy hour with the team, or maybe even a weekly theme song chosen by a nominated team member to kind of capture the week that was. But you know what, rituals, they don't have to be forever. If something doesn't catch on, it's okay. The important piece to remember here is that rituals, healthy rituals, create stronger, healthier teams. And I'm looking at the chat here, trying to institute a check-in for each meeting. Excellent. Okay. So, change. I was told by Innoweave that we don't have the budget to play Changes by David Bowie. So we're just going to move on from there. And, oh, I've jumped ahead. But what I will do, in keeping with sort of that musical theme, is an apologies to the counterculture and protest song War by Edwin Starr. I think a common lens of change can be, maybe not so positive. And you're welcome to those of you that are going to be humming this song for the rest of the day. So But seriously, I would genuinely like to know who here really likes the idea of change. So, you know, if you like the idea of change, feel free to comment in the chat. I personally like the idea of change. It's not always easy, but it is the only constant that we have. But a slightly different take on that question is who here is genuinely comfortable with change? And for me personally, I'm usually somewhere in between comfortable and uncomfortable with change, but really it all comes down to how the change is managed. So if change is managed well, then my comfort goes up. If change is not managed well or managed poorly, then my comfort drops as well. So speaking of managing change, let's take a quick look at a model. So here we have the bell curve, but it's for change. And so you can see here on the screen now was where those that are part of change usually fall. So the vast majority of people within a change fall within the two major columns in the middle, the early adopter majority and the late adopter majority. So I'm quite curious. In the chat, who was already doing a virtual team meeting or virtual team meetings prior to COVID? Let's see, how many people made that? Okay, so a few saying not prior, never. Okay, now, who went kicking and screaming into using Zoom or MS Teams or Google Hangouts for their team meetings? It's a safe space, please be honest. You know, sometimes change, you know, when it's something that we can control, like starting a new project, you know, that's something we can get behind. But sometimes when it's not, like when an entire population is being asked to stay at home, that can be very uncomfortable. But when we do have greater control over change, using proper change management techniques can help to move this curve to the left. So it means you actually have more innovators and early adopters. So that's what you want. You want more people within the organization, within the team that's experiencing the change to fall into those early stages than you would on the far side to the right. So here are a few questions to ask yourself when it comes to change. So reflection, what did or did not work with the COVID-19 changes at our workplace? And going forward, what can I do to move the curve to the left? And what can I create, or how can I create more innovators and early adopters? So those are a couple questions to reflect and ask yourself. So I said we're going to be doing light touches here and there, and we're moving on. So moving on from workplace culture, and let's get into some other areas. And in this particular case, let's jump straight into communication. So for a species that is so good at communicating, how is it that we can sometimes be absolutely terrible at communicating with one another? So, you know, we don't have too much time to spend on, you know, excellent communication in the workplace, but I wanted to give you a few key things to think about. So, number one, give positive, timely feedback, you know, also critical feedback. This is very important to building rapport and trust within the organization. Regularly scheduled check-ins. It's a good idea to ensure that the leader and the individuals are as aligned as possible. Promote two-way communication. So building on that concept of psychological safety that we talked about earlier and creating an environment that allows communication to flow upwards as well as down is critical. Make meetings less terrible. Who here is having Zoom or Microsoft Teams fatigue? Who gets frustrated when the agendas go off the rails or people don't come prepared? You know, what do we want? Better meetings. When do we want it? As soon as Gary can figure out how to unmute himself. One of the first things that I did when I started to do way more work via Zoom is I actually turned off my own view so I couldn't see myself. We have not evolved to constantly see an image of ourselves as we're interacting and talking with others. And I was finding it quite draining. And don't know if it's the placebo effect or not, but I feel much more energized when I leave a meeting, when I'm not constantly looking at myself and just checking to see, am I doing okay? Do I look like a complete fool? That kind of thing. Engage as workers, engage the workers as a group. So engage your team, build positive communication rituals into your team meetings. And lastly, use proper tools to communicate. So with COVID, more and more work has been done remotely. So ensure that you're using the right tools and the right software for the job. So emails are not the time and place for an editorial. Slack may not be the best method to communicate a 911-like situation. And maybe that phone call at 3 a.m. wasn't that necessary. So really think about what you're trying to achieve with the tools and ensure that you're using the right tools for the right job. So communication in uncertain times for leaders. So, you know, we certainly live, work, and play in uncertain times. And HBR has an excellent article entitled How to Talk to Your Team When the Future is Uncertain. And here are a few key principles taken directly from that article. And this article by Rebecca Knight, this is part of the free HBR coronavirus series. So you can go directly there and you don't actually have to have a paid membership to view this. So remember, do understand the leadership challenge that you face. So you're teaching people how to succeed in a crisis. Do consider your employees' perspective and think about what you would want to hear if you were in their shoes. And do encourage your team through rousing, inspiring language. Your message is, we can do this together. So a few don'ts. Don't trade in speculation. Be honest and truthful about the facts as they appear. Don't sugarcoat the situation. Otherwise, you'll potentially come across as a liar or someone who's out of touch. And lastly, don't ignore the personal touch. Meet with your team members one-on-one or in small groups and offer support. So the link to the entire free HBR article is actually at the bottom of this slide. When you do get the slide decks, feel free to click that link. It's an excellent article. So here is a tool that I'd like to share that's extremely effective with respect to providing feedback. And I'm looking at some of the comments and David Cork there, you know, being good at constructive criticism is the key. The COINS feedback model is extremely effective in providing feedback. And we don't have time to go into it in full depth, but you can download the full model for review afterwards. But effectively, COINS is a 5-step process that allows you to provide feedback of any kind to an individual. So it covers context. So when and where something occurred. Observation. So what you observed in non-judgmental language. And the impact perceived. So what you perceived the impact of the behavior or the action was. And next. So what actions might be next for the individual. And finally, stay. Stick around, check in to see how the individual received your feedback. So, like I said, this is a super light touch on this model, but I highly recommend that you take a look to see if this could be of use to you and your organization. I found it to be extremely powerful. So let's actually do a bit of a deeper dive into a model, a communication tool that I use all the time. So the tool is the Big Listen. And I first learned this tool over 10 years ago, and I've been using it ever since. I learned it as the Big Listen. You may be familiar with it or something very similar under another name. But effectively, it's a facilitated group exercise with 3 questions. That's it. It's ridiculously simple. It's easy to facilitate, and it's unbelievably powerful. So to facilitate, the environment needs to be safe, a safe space, and distraction-free. This can be done in person or via video conference, so it's a very flexible tool and can be extremely useful now that we live in this COVID environment. From a facilitator perspective, the facilitator could be someone from outside of the group, or it could be someone from within the group. And depending upon the sensitivity of the session, it might be worth considering that leadership not be present, as having authority figures you know, sometimes could suppress the psychological safety within the room, especially if that level of psychological safety in the group is low to begin with. So think about who you would want to facilitate. And if this is a virtual session, please ask that everyone have their cameras on, as that helps to create a greater connection through the process. So the benefits of this tool is it allows for every individual to participate. It allows for individuals to feel heard, can be used for large strategic issues like how are we doing as an organization, or laser focused issues like we've now been back in the workplace for 2 weeks, how's it going? And it takes participants through a positive, negative, positive cycle. So question 1 of the 3 questions. It starts on a positive note. What's going well for you? That's it. That's the question. Question 2, jumped ahead there. Question 2 allows, members to, show their concerns or frustrations, sometimes dive down into pity city, as I call it, just for a little while, but really it's about what's a challenge for you. And this list is quite often longer than the first one. And then the very last question out of the 3 is, it ends on a positive future-oriented note. So what's a hope for the future? And usually what you'll end up finding is that you get a combination of the answers from the first 2 questions. So if some of these questions seem familiar to you, it's because you were asked these questions when you registered for the session. So here are the results, and I apologize for the tiny, tiny font, especially the longer challenges, because you can see here I even had to shrink them down and change the font color. But you all had such great answers to these questions, but not to worry, we're going to be jumping through and we're going to be taking a quick look at each of the questions. So your big listen, what's going well from you? I'm going to just take a quick look at some of the highlights here. We can see that adaptation and flexibility, embracing change, 16 of you said this is something. 13 of you said working together, teamwork, collaboration. Work-life balance, less commuting was another big one. Increased creativity and innovation is going well. The team is resilient. Reworking or improved communication. So those are a few pieces there that's working well. So what are some challenges? This list was a little bit longer. The font's a little smaller, I apologize. Some of the highlights that came out for me, mental health, stress, fear, burnout at a 15. Team spirit, cohesion, staff engagement, 21. Uncertainty, 7. Internal communication, 7. Efficiency, 5. Continuous change, 5. Shifting to working remotely, 9. So those are a few, silos as well, layoffs. So those are a few from challenges. And what's your hope for the future? So some of the things that popped out, and not everyone who registered actually got this question. So there were far less individuals that answered this question, but we had foster, nurture individual team and engagement, job security, productivity, stability, predictability, control, integrate more virtual tools, better access to technology, and emerge stronger as a team. So are there any things that stand out to you out of these 3 questions and some of these answers? Please feel free to kind of jot something down in the chat. So how do you actually facilitate this? Well, we've got the instructions here, and whether it's in person or online, you're going to need something to capture thoughts. So ideally, something that everybody can see. So a whiteboard for in-person works really well, or shared digital document or online whiteboard for the virtual session. There are free online tools out there like Miro and Fun Retro, and I think we're going to pop the links to those in the chat. So you don't actually have to create your own virtual online tool. And a quick note here, these answers on this slide here, they're placeholders. So these do not come directly from your registration. So basically you create a 3-column table with each question at the top of the respective column, starting with going well. You ask all the participants the same question, one at a time in a predictable order. So each participant gets 1 answer, and then you move on to the next person. and you capture all the answers under one of these 3 columns. Now, if the answer has already been captured, you add a check mark. So here you can see that team support, 1 person said team support, and then we had 5 other individuals that said yes, that's going well. So when every participant has answered once, you go back to the very first participant and you ask the same question again, and you go through the same order, and you repeat the process until there are no new answers. And once there are no new answers, you move on to the next question. And basically you repeat that process until all 3 columns are complete. So when all 3 columns are filled out, you ask the group to look for, additions or changes, themes, insights, and you can essentially identify maybe the top 3 or 5 from each column and look at those as priorities. And that could actually be quite obvious from the number of check marks that are up on the board. And you can use this information gathered to inform decisions that need to be made or the directions that the group should be moving forward towards. So that's how you facilitate the big listen. I know that was pretty quick, but are there any specific questions about the process? I think we've got time for 1 or 2 if need be.
There's a question in the chat, Matt, so I'll read it here. When you ask these questions of your team, how do you facilitate the follow-up discussion, and what do you do with the feedback to ensure staff feel heard?
Those are some really good questions, Stephanie. Basically, one of the great things that I've seen some organizations that I work with do is engage some of the staff that participated in the Big Listen to kind of form a small ad hoc team to figure out what the next steps should be. So not only are you taking the information and the participants feel as though that they've been heard, but now you're actually engaging them and empowering them to take a look at what the next steps should be. If you have you as a leader, it's all very situational. It can be sort of an arm's length process, and they can come back and report to you as the leader, or the leader could be sort of embedded in the team. But really having the actual staff themselves be proactive and be engaged in this process is extremely powerful. I see someone says, can't wait to try it. You have a team meeting tomorrow. Oh, fantastic. How do you facilitate these conversations with folks who have language barriers? That's a really good question. So when we talk about, and speaking of that, and so I just realized that I have not had, I just realized that I haven't had my captions turned on. So we're turning that on right now. So Shabina, thank you so much for that reminder, and I do apologize. I should have had captions on earlier. I think that's a really important question, especially regarding inclusivity. And each situation is different. So I would encourage you to kind of really assess the situation, incorporate maybe some questions to the individuals involved, and see what is the best fit for them. Feel free to kind of modify this tool by all means. It's very simple, it's very flexible, it's also very adaptable. What happens if interpersonal issues between staff members emerge? That never happens, Diane, never. I think that it's a question of knowing your audience. So if you feel that that can kind of go multiple different ways, but if you feel that the team is not ready for this type of thing, then don't do it. If you haven't addressed those types of issues beforehand, then and you're aware of them, then this might be landmines that you're setting out for you to be stepping on, and the team. If this is stuff that is emerging in the moment and it's brand new to you, I think depending on your skills and abilities, it might be a moment to stop, or if you feel that you have the skills and abilities to kind of work through and sort of really dig in at that point, you can. Again, it's all situational. For those of us that are facilitators, that, if you want to make the universe laugh, make a plan. You just need to be as adaptable as possible. Okay, I think we're going to move on now, looking at the time. So staff. So goodness me, you'd think I'd never used a computer before. So we focused on workplace culture. We've taken a look at communication, but where would those two topics be without staff? So let's take a light touch on staff. And when I say staff, this can mean many things to you, it can mean many things to me, but would I urge you to define staff as employees, workers, or those crucial embedded volunteers, essentially unpaid full or part-time staff. We're not talking about day of or one-off volunteers. We're talking about the human beings who are heavily involved in the operations of your organization. So that's who I'm talking about when I say staff. So for this very light touch on staff, I would encourage you to build upon the first two sections to focus on what makes your staff tick. So what motivates them? What gets them out of bed in the morning? What allows them to make a dent in the universe through your organization and your mission? How are they really doing in this new and different world of ours? What allows them to continually improve your processes, your procedures, your products, or your services? And what allows your staff to be empowered? So you could do this in many ways. You could perform surveys, you could ask questions. Big listen, anyone? Try to remove your ego from the equation and listen, truly listen to what your staff is telling you. So with that, we're going to try a breakout session. So here's the question. Within the COVID context, share some experiments that you have tried, whether they were successful or not, to empower staff. You have 4 minutes. You're going to be broken out into random groups of, I think, 4 or 5. And what I would like you to do is come back and sort of share a key insight into the chat. So I think we're going to be breaking you out right now, and good luck, and we'll see you in 4 minutes. welcome back to those of you that are rejoining from their breakout sessions. 4 minutes moves very, very quickly, especially in Zoom land. We'll just wait for the majority to come back. I was telling Ana Sofia that I feel sort of bad because we're only having these super quick touches on all of these topics that usually I have my shovel and we dig right down into them. But at the same time, I think these are really great, at least conversation starters. Okay, we have most of the people back. Welcome back. I hope you all found that probably very short, but I hope you found that interesting at the very least. Unfortunately, we don't have time to spend a lot on some of the insights, but please do share the insights in the chat that you thought was sort of your #1 insight coming out of that session. So moving on, and it's our last section of the session, is leading in a Vuca world.
Matt, you'll need to reshare your screen.
Of course. You know, it wouldn't be a Zoom session without me messing things up. So I appreciate that. Perfect. Okay, so leading in a Vuca world. So the human world, as depressing maybe as this might be, will never again be as slow as it is today. Tomorrow is going to be faster, and the day after that will be faster still. We're at sort of this intersection of 3 unignorable movements: massive societal change, complex and powerful technologies that are emerging, and worldwide crises. So we very much live, work, and play in a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. And let's be honest here, this is a massive topic, and we could certainly, we're not going to be able to dive really deep into it. But the hope is from Innoweave and Human Elements that this sparks thoughts, dialogue, and action within your respective worlds. So this is the intersection that we find ourselves at today. So what does Vuca actually mean? Well, volatility. So how people, markets, countries, even artificial intelligence react to particular situations. So a good example could be a certain impending election to the south. So November 2020 is certainly shaping up to be one for the history books. Uncertainty. So that information about upcoming events is unknown or difficult to predict. Complexity. The interdependence and interconnectedness of different aspects of a system. So a fun systems mapping exercise to get your little gray cells going and with your team is to actually map out something very simple, like how to make toast, right? So what is the actual system that needs to be in place for you to simply make toast in the morning? And the last one is ambiguity. So this is not the same as uncertainty, rather ambiguity arises despite the fact that proper information is available to make decisions, and yet the path forward is still unclear. So you want me to lead in a Vuca world? Yeah, we do. Excellent leaders are no longer one-faceted leaders, managers who are good at getting productivity out of similar workers. Excellent leaders in a Vuca world are multifaceted. They're situational, they're adaptable, they lack ego, and they communicate effectively. They're strategic in their thinking, and they're also ethical. And no, these Vuca leaders are not mythical unicorns. They're individuals who have realized that in order to make the best use out of the resources at their disposal, whether that's money, materials, equipment, or the workforce, that just like each situation encountered is different, so too are the human beings that have been tasked to address these situations. So Vuca leaders place the round peg in the round hole at the right round time to fix the round hole problem. Vuca leaders also put a square peg in the square hole at the right square time to address the square hole challenge. So the law of instrument, or the law of the hammer, boils down to something like, when all you have is a hammer, every problem is a nail. And yes, Vuca leaders have a hammer, but they also have a vast toolbox from which to carefully choose a specific instrument for a specific problem. And Vuca leaders, they continually experiment and explore with motivating staff, different managerial and leadership models, and finding innovative solutions to complex problems. And Innoweave is interested in your thoughts about possible future leadership webinars. So there will be a section on that in the survey after this webinar. I am looking at the time, and I'm going to just quickly talk about the 3 F's of leadership: firm, fair, and friendly. I had this whole thing that I was going to talk about, but really leaders who don't put these 3 things in this order generally end up struggling or making life very difficult for themselves and their team. But I wanted to talk about this model specifically, the team performance and engagement versus leader frustration model. So as you can see, the team performance and engagement is this bluish line here. The challenges and frustration of leadership is here, and we have the dotted line of expected performance here. So when we get to this red line, what do we think is actually happening? Well, it's probably a breaking point. The leader is now, that's it, I've had it. And the team, they're downright demotivated, disengaged, and downright unhappy. And the proper time to try and address some of these things, like you might be able to do something here in the mighty zone. That's why it's called the mighty zone. You might be able to save relationships. But really, when you're looking at team performance and engagement, the proper time for a leader to intervene is much earlier on. And why are we talking about this? So, our workplaces have changed dramatically with COVID-19. Tensions, both personal and professional, can be very high, and this can impact employees' performance. Perhaps an employee has children re-entering school, perhaps there are expected budget cuts to the organization, and the employee is worried about the stability in the long-term future. Mental health and stresses of our current situation are very real, and they can have significant impact on the workplace. So the key here is that both the leader and the team need to embrace the moment and intervene when they see a negative situation starting to show itself. So leaders should work with staff to uncover the root causes for the change in performance and engagement. So address those underlying causes, really will show that the team, that the leader cares, they are indeed a team, and that the organization and the leader are willing to invest in the team's future. So once you've stabilized your team's performance by understanding and addressing the root causes, you're no longer firefighting issues. So now you've created a space for you and your team to focus on being intentional. So being intentional about the next steps you and your team will be taking. Being strategic about thinking long-term. Being agile, and no, this isn't the same as firefighting. Rather this is a fluid state of leadership where the creation and support of empowered staff is a priority. And you can be dynamic, in that constant state of change and adaptation. And grateful that you have a thriving team that addresses volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous challenges. And so that leads us to our Q&A, and so I'll invite you back as well. Here are some of the resources that we've put together. We've got 2 sections of resources. The first section here is some great mental health COVID-19 specific resources. We have resources regarding workplace culture, communication, staff and leadership. And we also have these resources specifically from Innoweave.
Thank you, Matt.
Sorry for all the talking, folks.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you so much for putting all of this great content together. I hope I kept seeing comments pop up in the chat, so I'm really looking forward to going back through the chat. I've picked up on some questions there that I'll share. So yeah, thank you so much, Matt. For the last slide that Matt shared there, I wanted to quickly, okay, you should see my screen now. These are some resources that we've put together. These link to different parts of the deck using the book icon at the bottom right. And then here are some resources specific to funding. There has been a lot of funding over the last 6 months, but it's been pretty volatile. So these are some funds that we've researched that are still available, and the details are linked here. The slide deck and the recording of the session will be shared to all of the registrants. And now I would love to just go straight to Q&A. Oh yeah, here are emails if you have any specific questions or follow-ups. But I do want to leave some space for open questions, so feel free to share those in the chat. And we'll stick around for the next little bit. So feel free to unmute yourself and ask any questions.
And the softball questions are most appreciated.
Yeah, and if you do have to leave to run to another meeting, thank you so much for joining today, wherever you're joining from. We hope you found this useful, and we look forward to keeping in touch, to hearing your thoughts, insights. The Leading Through Crisis webinar is, the Leading Through Crisis coaching stream has a website which we'll share in the follow-up as well, and you'll be able to access other resources and supports, including micro-coaching, mentoring with crisis experts, and other supports. So thank you so much, and have a wonderful rest of your day. And if you are sticking around, there are some questions here, Matt. I'm copying them in the chat. These are from earlier.
Perfect.
So there was a question on the curve. Oh, adapter curve. There was a question from David here. So on the adapter curve, do we always want to move the curve to the left? Asked by an early adopter. Dave, well, if you're on the line, feel free to chime in.
Yeah, David, yeah. Yeah, if you are on the line, David, I'm curious if you could expand on your question a little bit more.
Yeah.
If you're
Hi.
Oh, great.
It's Dave, and I meant, as I'm a terrible typer in my Zoom there, I meant, like, is there, like, and this is just, I've used this curve many times, but where I was thinking, do we move the people to the left of the curve? Like, is it always necessary to move, or is it important to still have laggards and, people to challenge? That I was just thinking there, that's where I was going.
Yeah, absolutely. And, everything is always situational. But some of the key benefits to change management is that you end up totally changing the curve. If you have, the proper communication and engagement with those that are undergoing the change, you end up having a much more bulbous front half of the curve, which significantly increases the likelihood of success of the change. So I think that it's, I think a lot of the times we don't fully think out change. And the more time and effort we put up front reaps greater rewards down the road. I hope that answers your question.
No, that's good. And I just had this other, like, when we talk, there's all these interesting, webinars and these things, and we're talking about, the last 8 months and all. So what do you see as the next steps that we need to take? That they see, the discussions all seem around this moment, but what are those next steps to help move forward?
Yeah. That's a really great question, and a big one too. I think really what it comes down to is it is very much uncertain what the future looks like. And so trying to stabilize your team, your staff, your workforce, and trying to embed this, build in the adaptability and the ability to take change and sort of roll with the punches, if you will, I think that's going to be critical because we really don't know what the next little bit is going to look like. So I think it's really important that, adaptability, being agile, and being open to quickly changing, you're going to find those organizations and those workplace cultures that sort of embrace that are going to succeed. I see a question from Joanne. What is the main characteristic that distinguishes a crisis-prepared organization and one that is not prepared? That's a really good question. And I would like to see what the chat has for answers to that as well. I think really it comes down to asking and being curious and asking questions. There's that phrase, plan for the worst, but hope for the best. So I think one of the things that was going well for someone who answered that question when they registered was that they had moved to a cloud-based office before all of this hit. And so I interpreted that as, wow, the transition was much more seamless than those of us, that potentially were working in offices where, there was a server inside the office. And, so I think that being curious and adapting new ways and looking for those efficiencies is a big piece of that. But really it comes down to curiousness. And from a board as well, board being curious and looking at different strategies and possibilities down the road and asking that of their executive director or their CEO, I think is critical. C. Young says, staying in the moment, knowing that there will always be twists and turns along the path to desired destinations. Absolutely. You kind of want to have sort of both traits of an oak tree, that sort of rigidity and that strength, and then also the flexibility of bamboo. So try and be a bamboo oak hybrid, I guess, is a good place.
I really love that, Matt. Flexibility of wait, could you repeat that?
So you want that flexibility of the bamboo, but that strength as well of the oak tree.
Got it.
Yeah.
Super. I wanted to take 10 seconds to thank Jake, who's on the line and helped set up the tech wizard for the session. So thank you so much, Jake, for the help with the breakout groups and the polls.
Happy to help.
And we'll stick around for a little bit more. So if you have additional questions, we're happy to chat, and have a wonderful rest of your day and take care. Thank you for all the thank yous in the chat too.
Absolutely.
Great to see everyone. Yeah. Okay, I think we're down to the 3 of us, 6 of us, and I will end the recording now.